Hey gang, welcome back to the channel. I am your host AJ, and in today's episode, we're gonna dive deep into my thoughts on short-term rental companies and if they're a good use for your business. So let's dive in, but before we do that, if you could just smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm for me, that would be amazing. I would really appreciate it. It helps the channel grow and helps me get my message out there. So in order for us to have this conversation, we first have to define what are each of these different methods. The first is self-management and the other is short-term rental vacation management. Now, someone who self-manages a property basically means that they have full responsibility for that property. They're the ones who are communicating with guests, they're the ones who are communicating with cleaners, they're the ones who are setting their pricing strategy, and they're the ones who are ultimately responsible for the success or failure of their business. So on the flip side of the self-management, there is the short-term rental management company who is basically taking care of all of that. They're the ones contacting cleaners, they're the ones who are in charge of the property as well as the pricing, the description, all of the listings, the photos, and making sure that they're communicating with guests. Companies like Vacasa, Evolve, AvantStay, who are basically doing most of those tasks for you. They're basically in charge of the property while the owner of the property actually just sits back and collects their monthly check. So obviously one requires a lot more work than the other. So which is right for you? Well, it all comes down to the money. So as far as the money goes, let's start with the short-term rental management companies. So if you're using a short-term rental management company, that basically means that they're going to take a percent off of the nightly rate that gets booked. So let's say that you are booking $100 a night for a particular guest. Usually an AvantStay or a Vacasa is taking anywhere from 25 to 30% of that nightly rate as payment. So you, on the other hand, would be left with that $75 to $70 after the payment goes through. So it is fairly steep, and it's very different from traditional real estate or property management companies who are only charging 1 to 3% on some of those long-term rentals. Now, there's a couple of things to be aware of with these companies. The first is that they are actually able to make more money when they are getting bookings directly on their own marketplace. So for example, you have Evolve or Vacasa who have their own marketplace, and because they actually own that customer, they can charge a profit from the customer side as well as from the host side on that percent of nightly rate. So that means that in some cases, they can actually charge guests more per night, making you more money because they don't have to necessarily pay the fees to Airbnb and because they own the entire customer experience on the front end. That might mean that you're able to make more profit because they're able to charge a higher rate. The second thing to be aware of is even though they might have their own marketplaces, sometimes they will even list on Airbnb or VRBO under their own host profile. What that means is that depending on where you're actually getting those bookings, either from VRBO, Airbnb, or direct on the Vacasa or Evolve websites, that's going to dictate how much profit you can make. The other piece of this is that management companies are actually in charge of their own cleaners. So they might be charging a higher cleaning fee so that they can take out some of that profit as well. So those are some things that you want to be aware of. And that allows them to make even more than that 25 to 30% per night off of just the price of your booking. I'm not saying that any of this is bad, I'm just saying that you should look at your options. And the great thing about these companies is that it is purely hands-off for you. And if you have a great property that rents well, this is something that you don't have to worry about at all. You just receive those monthly checks from these different companies who are managing your property. And so in that case, it is really, really passive. But on the flip side, if you're self-managing, there's a couple of key differences when it comes to money. Number one is that you are in charge of the pricing structure, you are in charge of cleaning, you're in charge of communicating with guests. But that also means that you can take those extra $25 or $30 per night and take that more as profit for you. So because you're putting in more work, you're not outsourcing any of this to a third company, in the end, you might be able to make more money. Of course, you'll still have to pay the 3% or 8% fees to Airbnb or VRBO respectively, but that is something that's already going to basically be built into your profit. The other piece of self-management is that you have entire control over your listing, your images, how guests are perceiving, as well as those reviews. That means that you can make sure that guests are very, very happy and you're not worried that some third-party organization is trying to do that on your behalf in a more automated and probably not as customer-friendly way as you or I would be doing on our own. As you're thinking about the amount of money that you can make between kind of self-management and the short-term rental management company, I really think that if you're looking for profit, you are much more likely able to squeeze more profit out of your properties if you are looking for self-management. You have full control, you can dictate your prices, you can use pricing software that allows you to scrape a little bit extra profit from each guest. That's going to be huge for each one of you as you're thinking about growing this business. If you're looking for something much more passive, then that's where you should be thinking about short-term rental companies. Now, in a lot of cases, if you're looking to partner and have this be more of a passive investment, you are not going to be paying those 25 or 30% portions to your partners. A lot of times there are certain splits, there's a couple of management fees, but it is nowhere close to that 25 to 30% margin that the short-term rental companies are taking from you. And then a lot of this comes down to the time that you actually have to devote to these properties. If you're like me, I have time on my hands to make sure that my guests are happy, to manage any guest expectations, make sure that I can quickly turn things around if something goes wrong with my property. That is all something that I have the time to do. And I can do that not just for my own properties, but for partner properties or for actually managing other properties at a much lower cost than trying to do it with 25 to 30% that you're giving to a short-term management company. And what this allows me to do is to make much more money, not only in the short term, but in the long term for myself and for any of my partners. And obviously take all of this with a grain of salt, because maybe in the future I will totally change my mind. I don't think so, but I might totally change my mind and decide, you know what, I'm just gonna make this much more passive and I'm gonna have somebody else take 25 to 30% of my profits, which I really don't think is going to happen. The best way that I know on how to scale this business is to be making as much money as I possibly can, reinvesting that in new properties, in new partnerships, in self-development, and then growing from there. Not necessarily from being hands-off and letting somebody else take 25 to 30% of my profit. So what are your thoughts on short-term rental management companies? Let me know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Also, if you've enjoyed any of my content, please hit the thumbs up for me for the YouTube algorithm. If you're interested in any of my guides or any of my spreadsheets, feel free to reach out to me at ajhustlesyt@gmail.com. And here's another video I think you're gonna like.